with a lot of, firstly, experience with ID. There's a lot of our black belts on ID are on this call, so they can all contribute to sharing, some of the really important nuances around your drives. And then on top of that, we've got people that have just had a lot of experience with ID through our client connections. And some of you are new to ID, but clearly you have a real passion around understanding more about yourself and understanding more about how you're similar and different to others, so that you can just have, better connection and better relationships with those you interact with. So welcome along. This is the structure now for those of you who are new, is that we have this masterclass every other week. And we've sort of adjusted this based on the feedback we've been getting for doing these now for 30 weeks through this year. They're a real highlight for a number of us, me especially, but as Judy was just saying, it's a real highlight of her week. And for a lot of us, I think just the group itself, how encouraging and accepting and authentic the group is. It's very enticing, a great way to learn. So thanks for being on this call. As a masterclass, I think it is important that we all put our numbers in with our names, so that a lot of us are trying to learn the nuances. And as we listen to what you share, sometimes it's even down to the words you use and the phrases or the stories. It's really great to hear it through the lens of your particular ID. And there are people that listen, like I get feedback afterwards where people have been listening to someone who've got a similar ID and they go, oh my God, I mean, it's like they were talking on my behalf. It's even down to the words they were using, I would use those words. So it's very uplifting when people can really relate to you that way. The purpose of these webinars, first and foremost, was to help people stay in stride through the challenges of life, really. And this year, particularly with COVID, it was, really laying it up. So one of the principles of ID is, staying in stride, not just knowing your ID, but using it to stay in stride, true to your ID, true to yourself, and be at your best. And so we have a mechanism to check that. We call that the peak performance indicator. I'll quickly show the slide for those of you who are new. You can relate to this slide. This is it. You might have seen, most of you have seen this before. But it's all about traveling life on that green arrow. So, if we could be true to, or doing what comes naturally, we would be true to ourselves. We would just do what instinctively rolls out of us. And when you are true to your ID and true to self, you get the things at the top of that green arrow. So your very best performance. And that includes things like making your best decisions. Decisions are a big deal for many people, particularly the more challenging ones. And sometimes we just seem to have a Midas touch where everything goes beautifully. And sometimes we just can't spin a trick. And I've found an absolute correlation to when people are in stride and out of stride as to when that happens. So, if you're not true to your ID, you not only miss out on all of those benefits at the top, but you start to experience forms of stress and distress that go along the bottom axis there, or the horizontal axis. And if you're just a little bit off track, it plays out, emotionally and behaviorally. So it might be a temper, it might be procrastination, it might be hitting the snooze button, it might be swearing. But eventually, if that tension builds up and lasts for longer, it starts to take its toll on your health. There is an absolute relationship between your mind and your body. And there are symptoms that we've found start to exhibit themselves very consistently if someone is regularly out of stride and intensely out of stride. And the 5 main buckets that I've found are energy, immunity, skin, respiratory, and digestive. There are others as well. So, for example, migraine headaches and high blood pressure. There are a bunch of others, but I've just sort of looked at categories. There are people that walk around taking medications for skin issues and putting creams on and so on, when once they understand their ID and they start to do some things to get back in stride, those symptoms don't just improve, they can literally disappear. And those of us who have been working with ID over the years have seen many, many cases where that has been the experience. So my question to you is, when you think about how life is going for you right now, on a scale of 0 to 10, if 10 is traveling right up the center line here and a 1 out of 10 is way out to the side, what's your number today? And even with challenges, our goal is to help you have such an advanced level of self-awareness that you might get pulled a little bit off track, but you wouldn't wander way off track. You'd understand your early warning signals and sort of get there really quickly, get back on track really quickly. So I just ask you to reflect on what's your number today. And if someone would like to, you're welcome to share your number. You don't have to explain why your number is what it is, But if there's anyone who has a particularly high number, like maybe a 9 or a 10, and everything's going really well, and you can feel that energy, you're welcome to share that. Or if someone's at a lower score, like 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1, and you'd like to share that, I'll just leave a couple of minutes so you can do that. Just make sure you take yourself off mute first if anyone has anything they'd like to share. Do we have anyone that would say they're a 10 today? Anyone who's 5 or below today?
Well, I'll jump in and just make a general comment. So, because you and I talked about this earlier in the year, I would say I'm now, sort of consistently bouncing around a 7 or 8, and it's a measure. It's, for me, a 10 would be almost unachievable in a way. It's like sort of living at that perfect level. So for me, 7, 8, 9 is sort of where I would love to be bouncing around. And I would say I'm bouncing around a 7 and 8 consistently, particularly over the last 4 or 5 months since we spoke, since I had an opportunity to chat on this group, since I've attended these sessions. And for those people who were on that session where I had an opportunity to speak, probably for the best part of 8, 10 years, I had been bouncing around a 4, 5, at best 4, 5, 6, because of challenges with my career, because of moves from various countries, because of some very challenging family issues, particularly with our daughter's ill health. So I had this extended period of living at a 4, 5, and at best a 6, and because of these workshops and because of some other things that I'm doing, I would now say I'm consistently bouncing around a 7, 8. And awesome. I just want to give you kudos for that, because you've been part of helping. And if I look at the career, family, society, education, relationships, all of those are now much closer to the green line than they ever were.
Right.
So that's just a general. Awesome. I can't get to your 10 yet, hopefully, but I am now able to live in that sort of 7, 8 range.
Yeah, that's awesome, Steve. Well done, and thanks for the feedback on it. It's good that you even just know that this type of, like an internal compass exists. So instead of just tolerating where you were, you can now sort of position it and then say, I know things can be better than this, and you know how to start looking to make the adjustments to get there.
Well, this has been very centering for me, and I. When we first met, whatever it was, 15, 16, 17 years ago, I sort of thought about this and probably didn't pay attention to it, but it's always sort of been there in the back of my mind. And as I've been gradually looking for ways to make that shift, I kept coming back to this, this whole notion of living in stride.
Yeah.
So this has been, this very slide and this particular graphic has been very centering for me, because it means I can work on the things that I need to work on to get myself as close as I can be to that green line.
Yeah. Well done, Steve. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I will say, just to share, look, when I think of my number, and I would say I'm a 10 today. I feel, and I was just trying to think of how to, whether to share it. And the reason I decided to share it was to explain what it feels like to be a 10. And when I was thinking, what's going on for me today that would make me say I'm a 10, the feeling inside is I feel like I'm on fire, like fire on fire, not burning, but on fire in terms of heaps of energy. And it's like, and someone says, man, I'm just on fire today. I've got all this energy. I'm almost bursting out of my skin. That's how I feel. And I've actually just had a workout. I was saying to Susie, I've just had this, I was exhausted an hour ago from the workout, but now I just feel on fire, and it's almost like look out world, because I'm on today. That's the feeling that is inside me, So when someone says, well, I'd never be a 10 because that's like perfection, that the difference is if you just sort of equate it to, do you ever have that feeling of being totally on fire? It's like you not feel invincible, but it's like, look out, well, because I'm really on today. That's the feeling, you know. And I think when people feel like that, not only is it possible to then be a 10, it's, you can't sort of hold back, you know. It's nice Susie saying she's a 10 as well, but it's just a great feeling, and it is that you want to share it because it's like oozing out of you, you know. And I would say to you, it's not about, for those of you who might even be an 8, and an 8's a great place to be in terms of casting that shadow, that influence. The more you can go to a 9 and a 10, you exponentially increase not just the feeling, the fulfillment within yourself, but it's about the shadow you cast, the influence you have on other people. It inspires other people. It empowers them just by you, of how you show up. There's a number of us have talked about over the years, when you're in stride, you know, you don't have to necessarily do anything to influence others. When you just show up and you're fully on, the presence of you and your energy of being authentic and in stride, it's like, who walks in the room when you do? There's a shadow that comes in with you, you know? And is that shadow going to be this big sack of negativity and baggage that's just frustrating to others even to put up with? Or is it something that lifts the room up? And I have this sort of saying in my consulting that you want to float all other boats, you know, and your energy when you're 8, 9 or 10 starts to have that positive influence on others. Hey, Greg, you and I have talked about making this more real. And I'm wondering if you're sitting there going, okay, how do we make this even more real for everyone else on the call?
All right, you asked for it, son. I'm thinking we get PPI, and I want to spend more time on what do we each need to do to move, because if we're going to be real, if I think the real day, I'd like to think in my real day, I'm moving up and down that scale, because things happen and I go, whoa, and I get bumped. It's like you're driving. You can't go in a straight line for more than 5 minutes. You got to turn, you got to shift, you got to stop, you got to move. And so I'm thinking, I'd like to hear how people move that number, not what number they are particularly, you know, and the idea is, how do we know what a 10 is? And I'd like to think that sometimes I'm in that 10, and I'm so in that 10, I don't have a score for it right now. I'm just in it. And people often say, how are you today? And I go, I don't know, I'm not grading me. I'm just here today. You know, it's like, yeah. And it's like, I want to move to what does somebody need to know to be a 10, like what a 10 is, how to move it, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I'll share mine, and then I'll open up for others to share this as well. And I just want to call out, Leonie made a great comment in the chat that for her, being a 2 in Improvised as opposed to being an improviser, you know, of whatever number, she's saying if she was a 10, it wouldn't be a case of feeling like she's on fire. She'd feel much more serene and sort of centered. And I think that's a great example of calling out the difference between the drives. That's just awesome, Leonie. Thank you for doing that. That's a great example to me of what this masterclass is all about, of, you know, being able to share those nuances so people can go, okay, I get it now. It's, you know, 10 can be even different things for each person, but it's still something that, like when Leonie was a 10 and very serene, she'd still be casting a really positive influence on those around her. Okay, back to Greg's point, I would just say to you, hang on, one go. I just want to share, I'll just share what in response to Greg, and then we'll open it up. So for me, physical exercise is a big part of it. If I start my day and I've had a great workout, which is pretty much every day, that's always a great place. But when I've got, you know, when I know there are calls that I feel prepared for, that the energy around is positive, like I look at, you know, what's been going on in my week, but also this call is something I love doing. All of the calls I've got after this are all really exciting, positive calls. So I feel like everything I'm doing is making a positive difference, which aligns to my mission. You know, as a 1 in Authenticate, when something lines up with my truest values and mission and sense of purpose, then I guess I'm on. So in answer to Greg's question, when I can make sure those things are happening, that will always kick my number north. Gail.
Yes, sorry. I was just going to say, interestingly, that for me, it's not about feeling I'm on fire. Maybe I'm always on fire. It's actually a well of joy. So inside, I have this well of joy that just keeps welling up. And as the day progresses, and as Greg said, and things change, there may be a little less joy, but there's joy. And for me, I always find it really hard not to be 9 or 10. It's a rare day it's as low as an 8, because, yeah, that's just it. So it is a different feeling for different people. I don't know that Serene enters into it, but it's so interesting that someone said, I'm a low improviser, I'm serene, whereas for me, it's about a well of joy. And I just wonder, what is a well of joy in comparison to serenity? Anyway, that was all I had to say.
Thanks, Gail. Anyone else on this point about what do you do to shift your number? Has anyone uncovered strategies for themselves that they can see aligned to their ID? And you can see in the chat, as you share, there's so many people who have got similar IDs really relate to what you're saying. So if you're sitting on something, please share it. Please, make yourself vulnerable enough to share it, because it really helps.
Paul, you made a good point about when you work out. So whenever I worked out and pushed myself hard, I'd be a 9 or 10. And I think that also relates to life in general. And I think being mindful during the day and recognizing when you're not in stride is a key to getting back in stride.
Yep.
And I was really interested in Al Ramos's comment last week about mindset. Don't sweat the small stuff. And sometimes I think if we're not mindful, then we're living in a world where we're believing that things are dragging us down when they don't need to. So I think it was a good comment by Al. But pushing yourself, for me, another 9 in improvised, when I'm pushing myself, I seem to be much higher.
Okay.
And after a bloody good workout, I'm on fire for sure. Wow.
Good on you, Mike.
Hi, this is John.
Hey, John.
To me, whenever I talk about, or whenever I think about being a higher number, it seems to diminish it for me. It's the opposite to everything else. When I talk about a task, it empowers me. I'm usually super high. I don't know what the number is, but I always have this feeling of being blessed. And that I wake up in the morning and I never drink a cup of coffee like my wife does, because I have lots of energy. Sometimes in the afternoon, I lose some energy. I take a little nap, 15-minute nap, and it's like a brand new day. So that's how I kind of judge that. When I'm too anxious and I don't understand why, I just take a nap. I just go to the backyard. My wife's a master gardener. She's got a beautiful backyard for me to work in and just relax. And next thing I know, I'm asleep. 15 minutes later, it's a brand new day. I wake up to hummingbirds and flowers, and I'm like, here I am. So it's, but when I keep talking about it, I'm just like, what am I? 9, 10, 7? I really, every time I talk about it, I seem to diminish a little bit.
Well, you raise a good point that came up last week. I think it was last week, if not the week before, where putting a number on it is a bit of a verifier bias. A lot of the people who were avoid verifiers were saying that it's more, what was the word? More binary for them. So it's like they're either up or they're down. The number's not the important thing. They're either they're either on or they're off, because that is their ID. They're either 100% in or 0. There's only the two sort of speeds. And so it's for a number of you, it won't, who are avoid verify, it won't relate as much to maybe put a number on it, but you can still sort of say, well, where would you be? Would you be up or down? And then just you start talking to that. And that's really the point. It's more what you do about it to get it to be your best, the feeling inside you and the result that delivers for you. Listening to you, and Richard's got a similar idea to you, and he made the comment about he starts doing something physical, and as I listened to you as an authenticator, that seemed to resonate from what you were saying as well.
And I can also turn it on. I mean, all I have to do when I'm in a weird situation and I feel like I am overburdened, I start feeling like Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay.
And I seem to have control of the situation.
Excellent. Excellent.
That seems to work for me. Just that thought of being Obi-Wan and just say, move along, you know, and things just moves.
Good for you. Good for you. Thank you, John. Thanks for sharing.
Well, I was just going to share something that I found that seemed to help me improve my number, and maybe it's, you know, a mental thing, kind of like John was saying, is that I started using the quiz. I stumbled upon it looking on the website, and I remember seeing it in the past, but taking the quick quiz. And the questions are, you know, do you feel motivated? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel, you know, like those? I found reassessing what I'm basing it on helped me improve. I think I tended before to just focus on like what came to my head at that moment, what was I dealing with at that moment. I was kind of focusing more on the negative than the positive sometimes when I was thinking of this number. And so now I feel like I usually am like an 8 or 9, unless it's, you know, a 9 o'clock meeting I'm having at night. But most of the time it's much higher now.
Thanks, Vanessa. That's really good to know. Yeah, and she's referring to one of the pages on our website, guys. If you jump in there, it's a quiz that you can take just to, you know, check in with yourself on this particular item of whether you're in stride or not.
Paul, it's Joe. What I do, there's a couple of things, I guess, but I need to be feeling that I'm going to add value or be useful or make a difference that day. If I'm feeling that there's nothing planned, and sometimes that's fine, but if I feel like I should be doing something and I'm not, that's when I can feel, and I'm like Greg and the others, on, off. I don't have the rating bit. But I need to feel useful. And the other one is, just getting out and doing something physical. But it's just changing. It's actually where I am now. If there's something going on, I just get out, go do something, go see somebody, have a conversation, and immediately I'm way back up there again. So it doesn't take much to get me changed. I'm very conscious of it, have been for years.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm going to follow Joe. It's Kevin, and apologise, I cannot get my camera working for some reason. Joe, that's really resonated. I'm the opposite ID, it looks like, and yet I can absolutely relate to how you feel. Adding value and helping other people and is what keeps the PPI running up the scale. And yet we're complete. So my read is we're complete opposite IDs. I'd be curious as to some comments around that.
Well, maybe the outcome's the same for you, Kevin. How you get there is probably different, or not probably. I mean, as someone with an opposite ID, it would be different. And you said in the chat, I think it was, that you're an 8, and I remember you commenting on this several weeks ago that, you know, that's been a big shift for you and where you've been living. So what have you done to get your score to a higher number and then stay there fairly consistently? What's changed in the way that you're operating day by day these days?
But also listen to his language. Kevin, Joe was talking about being useful and doing something, and Kevin says adding value and helping people. So his 8 and his 7 spoke up first, you know, and it was like the drives may sound like they're saying the same thing, but what he's getting out of it is something different than what Joe's getting out of it.
Thank you, Greg.
That's really cool. Thanks, Greg. And I guess I've been thinking about, Paul, the question you just asked me, and I've taken my eyes off myself, I suspect, a lot more consciously. That would be my comment.
Well, and what do you mean by that, Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I've been wallowing around in poor little old Kev all year. We haven't got time to talk about it much. I've had a lot of injuries this year. Bicycle path accident. Anyone who rides bicycles will relate immediately. and so there was a little bit of poor little old Kev. So taking my eyes off myself, and obviously joining this class this last month has been probably the biggest shift, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
Better get her.
Hey, this is Amy. Here I am.
Amy.
Yeah, all this, thank you all for, those really resonate with me, as I kind of said in the chat as well. But I think the thing that kind of I group it all together is that awareness of self, right? It's like catching yourself. Like if, let's say I'm going down and it's like, oh yeah, I'm striding at, 4 or 5, right? It's like, oh, it's like, wait a minute, like taking a pause and it's like, what's going on? What's happening here, right? Like, and just stepping back and almost being outside of myself. And maybe that's something Kevin kind of touched upon. It's not just about I'm in it and deep, and it's like, wait a minute, right? So what are my triggers? So I think that though, like both like Joe and Kevin said, they're different in IDs, but really we're all human. So our outcome still is like happiness, right? That's what I'm sure, Paul, your this is all about, right? It's like we're all different, but we have that commonality of striving ultimately for, the same similar outcome, right? So yeah, it's kind of that awareness and just pausing. So
thanks, Amy. Well, guys, in the interest of moving along, if anyone has anything they'd like to share and get some insights on, maybe offline, please feel free to reach out. Some of you have, and I always love spending the time to try and help guide if that would be helpful to you. But other than that, let's move on with the next, really the other purpose of this masterclass was to start sharing some different challenges that people might have on their mind, and then use the power and the insight of the group to help each other, address them based on their ID. So does anyone have anything? Some of you have sent some questions in ahead of time. I'll grab them while I, let you answer this question. But has anyone got some things on their mind they'd like to discuss with the group, do a problem solving with, like something going on between either with yourself or between you and someone else, or you and your team, or whatever's on your mind that you could use to learn more about your ID or ID generally? We'll just maybe take a little inventory of 3 or 4 of those and then use the remaining time to try and address them.
Last week you were working on how we make big decisions.
Yes.
And you'd gotten through the first 4 and talked about going to the others today. That was very interesting to me, and I just wondered about it.
Yeah, I'm going to cover them in the next public webinar that we do, Judy. We'll finish them off, which is in another couple of weeks. So we use today more for it's a more advanced level, to talk through issues on people's mind.
Okay.
Certainly not forgotten. I've got the slides all there, half done, and we'll complete them when we do the next main webinar.
I think I just misunderstood how they were going to come up.
No worries.
Paul, can I suggest Paul, can I suggest something for the rest of us to do while anyone else starts to share? Is listen to what they're saying, look at their numbers, and try to understand which drive just said that. And it helps this masterclass develop their skill set in understanding what drive's talking. And we're guessing, but it'd be great to go, that sounds like the verifier, and we can always check in later. But it means we're actively listening to the words from an ID point of view.
Thank you, Greg. That's great guidance. Once a teacher, always a teacher, Greg. Good job.
And I think to further on what Greg just said, then by just listening and hearing those things, you start to get patterns for them working with people that you don't know their ID. So you can link it back to the person where you did know their ID, and you know what stuff worked or didn't with them.
Thanks, Richard. So we have, in fact, Richard, maybe it's a good segue to you, because you sent a question in advance. I'll just share that you had a couple of comments, so I can share them with the team. But and well, maybe others think of other things that might be on their minds. But you had 2. One of them was just going back to the interview I did with Jesper Anderson, who's the CEO of Infoblocks, and you said, given that his leadership team is a void complete, as is the case for many senior, teams, leadership teams in particular, what strategies are in place for that team to ensure they deliver for the business? So that was one of Richard's questions. And the other one was, a comment was made by Jesper that the engineering manager, who was a strong verifier, wasn't using ID with his team, nor was it felt that that was a problem. Given the 80% adoption across Infoblocks of ID, what strategies have been used to help him or them see the benefit for themselves and the business? And then the third one, Jesper and his wife have got different IDs, have found ID valuable for their family. What strategies do similar IDs adopt to make a successful long-term marriage? So there's some great questions there already. Has anyone got anything else that might be on their mind before we maybe dive in and start addressing some that Richard put up? Okay, then let's get to work. So the first one, just to repeat it for you, was if you've got an avoid complete leadership team, what strategies are in place for them to ensure they deliver for the business? So I'll just say this, that this with these teams, and I'll share what I'm aware of, but some of you might have strategies as well, if you belong to a team like that, that you've been using to ensure that you, you can make things better for that particular team. There are a couple of things that stand out. The number one strategy is they meet every quarter as a leadership team, and they've been absolutely loyal to that principle for the last 3 years since they decided to do it. And what was really interesting, I'll just share this story with you, was I had worked with them before, and then we had a little bit of a break. And I thought to myself, high performance teams, there's two things that they need to do. Like, I found these to be absolute deal breakers. And if a leader wasn't willing to do these two things, then we might as well pack up and go home. One is they've got to meet quarterly and realign as a team, not just on the work. A lot of them do QBRs and, planning discussions are about the work, but talking about the team. How are we doing as a team? What's working, what's not working, what have we got to do better? And dedicating a serious amount of time to that discussion. So back when we could have, offsites, they would typically come together for 2 days at a time, and a good half day at least was spent on the team, normally day one, sometimes the full day. So day one was team, day two was business. But it was at least, as I got on a roll, it was at least half of day one on the team, and then the rest of it went into business. But, and I remember thinking, how am I going to convince Jesper that he's got to meet every quarter and do this down? The second principle was you've got to do this for your entire people leadership cohort, not just the top layer. And I went in, wondering how I'm going to convince him to do this. And he stood up in front of his team and he said, so guys, here's the deal. This is a journey. This isn't a one day, one and done sort of event. And we're going to keep meeting every quarter. And I stopped him. I remember saying, whoa, Jesper, this is a big change for you. I was sitting here thinking, how am I going to get you to do this? And now, you're just voluntarily saying it. What's happened for you to make that call? And he said, it's really easy, Paul. I've had 2 years of not doing it. And I've seen what's happened. The amount of disalignment that occurred because we weren't having a regular, opportunity to realign as a team. And so when you think of an avoid complete team, one of the biggest challenges that almost every one of those team faces is alignment. And it's not just alignment as a team, it's actually alignment through the entire organization. And when you get, if mum and dad are aligned at the top, all the kids underneath, they start, following suit a lot better. So I would say the quarterly rhythm of those meetings and what those meetings are about was probably the most potent strategy, Richard, in terms of having an influence. And this is a company that quadrupled their shareholder value in the last 4 years. So, clearly even though there's probably been a number of mistakes along the way and they say they're far from optimized, there's still many things they could be doing. There's no question that not only their results, but frankly, the culture that Jesper has created, which is very aligned to what ID stands for in terms of everyone working to their strengths, able to be authentic, that's safe to be vulnerable and all of that. They've got a great culture, like it's a culture anyone would be proud to belong to. And maybe there's some InfoBlocks people that could even speak to the value of belonging to that. But that's the first and probably most significant strategy, I'd say, Richard, that I'm aware of that they've been using. And I keep it to one strategy because I don't want people to think that there's 15 things that you need to do, because we could give you, and I suppose the old me, 10 years ago, I would have given a team maybe 6 or 7 strategies to use. But I found that I look for now what's game changing. I used to call them acupuncture points, and now I look for what really works that's game changing. And I'll tell you, having that regular cadence is game changing. The other strategy that is like an absolute when it comes to game changing is assuming positive intent. And we install that protocol as a protocol for trust in every team we work with. And I started with Telstra with that strategy on December the 1st, 2010. And every team we've ever worked with ever since signs up to that strategy. And if you talk to people at InfoBlocks, they would tell you that language, we talk about having a common language within an organization, that language of assuming positive intent is very widespread across the InfoBlocks group.
Paul, what I did notice, you can probably advise, but his Jesper's PA was a very strong completer.
Yes.
And I think he gave her reasonable authority to make things happen. And that impressed me, and it tallied with him balancing his team out, you know.
Yeah, and so that's right, and she's coming more and more into that space. I mean, it's one thing to be a completer. I've been working with Pam, and I'm sure I was just checking if she was on the call. I'm sure she'd be okay for me saying this, but you also then need to be a completer that speaks up and will help the team stay accountable. I mean, Richard, you're a great example of that within our community, where you will speak up and hold us accountable to things like Judy did before as a completer, saying, hey, we're halfway through that decision making. Are we going to finish the other half? Now, in that particular case, it's definitely on my mind, and we've got that slated for the next seminar. But there are plenty of times where the completers in my life will say, hey, Paul, or probably more likely, hey, Dad, what happened to so-and-so? And I'm like, oh, good call. I forgot all about that. I've moved on. And that's why this regular cadence of, so even in a family, there might be things you do regularly, and you need to set them up as, like, in business, you call them protocols. In a family, you might call them traditions or, rituals, things that you do, because I've found that the best teams operate as completer teams. If you think about sports teams, if you imagine a sports team where people say, I don't feel like training today, if it's based on feeling, or we don't put in a proper routine. But the best teams do have routines. They do have rituals. They do have the accountability, and they hold people to those principles. In business, we don't typically operate like that. So you want to have a structure that's clear for people, but then you want to create the latitude for people to still be true to their IDs within that. Does anyone else see or feel that they've had other strategies they've seen work in avoid complete teams that have made a really impactful difference?
Paul, I think you made a pretty good point there, and referring to what Judy said, I suppose the way I put those questions about the Jesper session, it did finish up saying, hey, we'll unpack it next week. And to me, when we didn't, I go, oh, are you kidding me? So this was probably a way to bring it up, and it's how you bring it up, and do you just annoy people by doing it, and they say, oh, we're over that, we're moving forward. So I think there's ways to bring it up, and hopefully, look, I even checked with Greg yesterday as to the wording of the question I sent in to Ian. I said, is this going to annoy people? He said, no, it should be right. So I have to be mindful of that, because I see it straight away, that next week, when we didn't talk about the InfoBlocks thing, fair income, I mean, I'm not good on the numbers on the PPI, but I might have been up there, but by the end of the session, I was sinking right down to the bottom. And so I felt exactly what Judy just said before. Hang on a minute, I thought we were going to do the rest of the thing we started last week. So just know that that's where people are because of their ID. How they bring it out and whether it's respectful is sort of another thing that you have to approach.
So good to share that, Richard. So firstly, it all lands well for me. I say as a one in Authenticate, if I know where people's intentions are, there's virtually nothing they can say that would be offensive. For those of you on the call, Richard's 6 in complete is why he's, it's a drive for harmony. So even how he presents something, You can see the care he's gone to make sure it doesn't ruffle any feathers in how he then delivers it. You know, the truth for me is last week, I mean, we had Jesper's call the week before, so that's 2 weeks ago. When I got on the call last week as an avoid complete, I totally forgot that we were going to unpack that you know, discussion, and just moved on to what I thought was next and relevant for the team, you know, which a lot of people had shared about decision making. And then halfway through the call, I'm even thinking, because I do have a memory, you know, and I'm like, oh shoot, I think we're going to unpack that call, but there's no time to do it now, so we'll do that at another point in time, you know. And then with the decision making, I mean, that was the whole group that was there last week, and it's such a great discussion. We'll keep that for the other one, but we've, you know, they're just my examples, but Richard's point is, in a team, this happens all the time. And the feedback that I think is really helpful is to hear the effect it has on someone's motivation and fulfillment in what they're doing. Because you just heard Richard say, you know, I came into the call at a really high score, and the fact that we didn't do what we said we were going to do, look at his ID. It's like it didn't go to plan. It just hadn't, you know, it demolished his, you know, enthusiasm and motivation. So firstly, I apologize, Richard, and I know that's not the reason you raised it, but it's a great call out as to what actually happens when we inadvertently, you know, we'll say things not realizing the promise we've made or the plan we've just invoked. And if we don't follow through with that, look at the effect it has on people.
Hey, Paul, it's Grant. How you going? I was just going to check.
Kidding.
I thought it was a great question, Richard, and I think I put a comment in the chat there about, I think it's a real demonstration of ownership for this community about making sure that we don't sort of leave that hanging. I was going to ask the question around that avoid complete drive for the team. Is there also a need to put tools in place to cover that? So don't just rely on Jesper's PA, who's the completer, to be the completer for the team. Is it also about putting systems and processes in place to make sure that they cater for that? So if, the example I'll give is whenever Greg and Richard do work with my teams, if there is a strong avoid complete, well, it may not be just because there's a strong avoid complete, but they'll regularly say to us, you need to put need to put an action tracker in place. Sorry, my Siri's going off here. She does it regularly. It's no problem. Is there a need to put an action tracker or something similar in place to ensure that there are completions?
Say, Paul.
Yes, Ted.
Yeah. Just to answer that, very much so for me. I'm a 2 and complete, and right now feel like I'm at a 9 or a 10, and part of it is because I have a lot of flexibility, but I also feel responsible for accomplishing things when I'm supposed to. So I use things like task reminders and calendar just constantly. I mean, that way it's off of my mind. I can do whatever I want, and I'll get this reminder that'll pop up because I don't have a Sarah to do that for me anymore.
Right. That's right. So it's a great call out, Grant, and I can see in the chat everyone agreeing with a lot of the comments that you're making here. What I didn't go into was what's covered in those quarterly meetings and the framework that they use. There is an actual framework for it. I just didn't drill deep because I didn't want to get sort of too complicated with it. But if you have those, there's an actual framework that's used in those meetings to then keep people on track, like specific things that get covered. But that's even getting people to the meeting, and showing up. There's ways that's designed. We, help put all that together. But I will just say, if a team committed and then followed through and had those meetings every quarter, that has been a game. Start with that, and then you can design whatever principles and protocols and action plans you want to put in. But just even having those meetings, I mean, even if the meeting was somewhat, substandard, it would still be valuable to have that meeting because of what it does for helping align the team. The second thing I would say is, just because you have a completer on the team doesn't mean that completer is a completer. Because if you think about what I've seen many times is, because a completer is into harmony, if they're the odd person out in the team, which they often are, then they are reluctant to speak up and say what they are truly experiencing and seeing for the team, because they don't want to be a wet blanket, and they're often perceived as a wet blanket. Richard was saying before, if I raise this, is it going to irritate everyone? Now, the truth is most people really value that contribution, but it doesn't always come across. Their first reaction is often one that makes it feel to the completer like you're annoying them by raising it, you know? So they think, oh, it's better I shut up and keep the peace than say something. And so a lot of the completers need to either be really encouraged to speak up, or need to feel like you've created a safe space, or you need to work with them offline to help them see that one of the team roles, I've got a workshop later today with a client, and we've talked about team roles. So what are the specific roles, not the title they have in the team, like why they belong to the team, but now that they're on the team, there are certain roles they can play to bring value to the team. And as a completer, saying to that person, you know, helping us stay on track, reminding us of what we said we were going to do, reminding us of things we've done in the past that we've forgotten all about, and we should be leveraging those now. That's like being the corporate sort of historian on the team. That's incredibly valuable, but we need you to speak up. It's not enough just to belong to the team. We need to really contribute that, even if you're only the one person who's doing that. It's great if you can have more than one, because then they feel some solidarity. But as the facilitator of those discussions, you know, I find I've often got to really pull it out of the completer and also really support the completer, make sure that they feel safe and really acknowledged as bringing value for what they're sharing. Because
that's a big part of our work. We realize that when we see a leadership team and there's only one completer in there, we go, well, we know who's doing all the work on this team. And there's a sense of him getting overloaded or her being overworked, and they're the last to speak up, to complain. They're the last to not say yes. And the rest of the people with the down improvisers and the up improvised and down complete, they're ready to move on. And those moments, those little windows that the high completes need and the down improvised to get that right moment to speak up, they're just passing like that. And I think one of the best, I was said in my comment, most of our time is herding in that down complete and the up improvised leadership teams, of which there's often a lot, to make space for the up completes and the void improvised, who are providing some gold that often just gets buried. And controlling that dynamic between the up and down complete, I think is as crucial as the up and down authenticate, because we down completes just don't get how thoroughly involved in and what depth of thinking is going on up there. And we're ready to just skip on. And I think if you're living with someone with that opposite drive, you really learn this quickly. You know, that there's way more going on. You got to give them some space, and then the gold will come through.
But isn't that a leadership trait? To me, I kind of drive it a little different way, since I lead technical teams, and and people understand what pleases me, and they want to please me. So and so it's really simple when you are in that position. When people please you, you acknowledge when you're pleased, and you have a direction. First of all, you have to have a direction and a plan that everybody understands, and know when everyone will please you because they've executed to the plan, or they play the devil's advocate and tell me why the plan or something is wrong. That also pleases me. And so my team knows when I'm pleased.
They will in your case, John. The challenge is there aren't many leaders at the top of these organizations with IDs like you. You know, our numbers show that around 75% of leaders are a void complete. So, you know, when we can find a leader like you, it's very refreshing, but it's rare. So what most people are dealing with is the opposite to you, which is, you know, just, it's not good or bad, it's just what is. And there are a lot of strengths about, you know, the leadership that is there today, just as there would be vulnerabilities about your style of leadership too. But the vast majority of leaders, and for that matter, leadership teams, are the opposite to you. which is, you know, why so many people like you find it very challenging as well, but why the teams that you build will really stand out.
That's nice to hear.
And also your language, John, your language is in terms of they're going to please me and they know when it pleased me. No high authentic complete's going to say that, you know, like they're going to, your 7 said that, you know, and you're in a safe environment with your 3 down where you can be safe to speak up with no really fear of repercussions. You're the boss. And so when you switch that around, really high complete down improvised, would take the 7 away. And these Richards and some of the other people they're not, well, Richard's a bad example because he's like you, but the other ones, they're just not going to speak up as quickly and as soon. And the more you encourage them, the more you'll get from them, basically, I guess I'm saying.
I have a slightly different situation, Paul. Working with a team of accountants, they're all completers. And so I'm always in this situation. I've moved on and they're still there. And I find it quite, shall I say, challenging. So what I try to do at the end of everything I say, I appreciate my ideas, unusual for working with a team of accountants, but I just sort of try and remember to stay where we are and not shift too quickly so that they've got processing time, and also remind me when I'm moving on to the next thing far too quickly for their needs and wants.
I'm sure they'd appreciate it, Carl, knowing the significant difference between you and them. Guys, in the interest of time, I'll just share with the avoid complete aspect of the leadership teams. We're focusing on, you know, going off track, and you know what can be done to help them stay on track, whether that's with an agenda, whether it's a completer calling them out. I will just call out one of the other significant vulnerabilities of avoid complete leadership teams is way under scoping what it's going to take to do what they're committing to do or planning to do. And I would just say, as a rule of thumb that you can sort of take as a takeaway from this discussion that you go and maybe help influence in a constructive way in the teams, is my experience is they underscope by a factor of 3. So whatever they say they're going to do, it's going to take 3 times as long, involve 3 times as many people, cost 3 times as much, but it's about a factor of 3. And I've watched and measured that for years now. So if you hear someone saying, we're going to take on this particular initiative, we're going to put, 3 people on it and we're going to have it done in the next 90 days, just watch what actually happens. Because most avoid completes think everything's going to take 5 minutes, we just see what's in front of us. And the fact that it takes longer, as avoid completes, we don't really mind because we just keep adjusting as we go along, and we forget by the time we finish it that, oh, that's right, we said that was only going to take 90 days, didn't we? Even though it took all year, So on the thing I bring into the discussion is, if you knew it was going to take 3 times as long, if you knew it was going to cost 3 times as much, would you still do it? Would you do it the same way? Would you make some adjustment? And when we have that discussion up front, it's a game changer in terms of how people then approach it. Because the avoid completes know they underscope, but they just forget that they do. And so they just keep planning as if, their intentions are going to be the way it plays out. And that's like almost an overwhelming sort of difference, like an orders of magnitude difference, is that they're only doing 1/3 of what's required. Imagine a pilot saying to you, let's get in the plane and fly from, Sydney to Los Angeles, but I've only got enough fuel to make it to Fiji. I mean, no one would get on the plane. And that's how completers feel when they're sitting in a room hearing all this discussion, and they're hearing the commitment that's being promised or contributed, and they're like, this is just nowhere near enough. And yet everyone else seems enthusiastic and committed to it. So maybe I'm the one who's missing something. Okay, well, I'll go along with it to keep the peace. I don't want to, as someone said in the chat, I don't want to destroy the momentum that's there. But when you watch it play out, there's so many of the leadership teams that are around the world today, they way underachieve what they said they're going to achieve, but it was still a result that was good. So they declare victory and move on. But if you actually compare their result to what they promised or plan to do, it's significantly different. And I think knowing that up front as a member now, as a self-aware person of ID and seeing those teams, you can start to call that out and say, whoa, hang on a sec, let's play this out. If this was just play with it. If it was going to take 3 times, oh, show them what's happened in the past. That's one of your strengths as a completer. Show them how it's happened in the past and say, why would it be, what are we doing that's any different? So let's adjust the game. And I can tell you if someone's aware of that, it makes a real difference.
Yeah, I totally relate. This is Jessica 5763. But I find though, if there's avoid completes and high improvise, there's a lot of excitement, right? So bringing even data or examples is stopping that momentum, right? Is stopping that excitement. And then you're kind of viewed as the block to my great idea, right? Or at least that's my feeling around my experiences with that.
Sorry, just to on what you're saying, Jessica, my husband is 2738, and our marketing manager, we work together, and our marketing manager is also avoid complete. So one of the strategies I have when they come up with ideas is I'll let them talk, and sometimes it's just an idea they have and they get excited. If they bring up the idea again, then I'm like, okay, all right, this is serious. Let's start actually talking about it and making a plan. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, thank you. I know I've had to learn because I'm also high authenticate, so I'm very direct too. So I think early in my career, I was very just sitting in the corner observing and then kind of like jumping out of my seat internally. But, you know, as I, progressed through my career, I've learned to be able to, word things a little bit different or kind of stop and gather my thoughts before strategically speaking.
For you guys, Ian just made a really, I think, pertinent comment in the chat that when you do see, not a conflict, but that there is something you need to call out for the avoid completes, and especially if you've got the improvised drive, he put there, run with the horse before you try and turn it. And I think that's a very good strategy to keep in mind. People with that improvised ID, and they don't want to hear no, they want to hear that we're still moving forward, but run with me and then start to turn the horse. I think that's a really great call out, Ian. Thank you for contributing that. So guys, we're right at the top of the hour. And by the way, I'm not sure what sort of horse you might be referring to there, Ian, with who you're working with, but anyway, I hope it's a good looking horse.
Absolutely. Only one chin, no.
All right, so guys, we're at the top of the hour. We've, haven't dealt with some of those other questions. I might just keep them in store there, Richard. So if there's time down the track, we can deal with them. If there's a way you'd prefer to have them dealt with, please let us know so that we don't let you down.
Real quick on your last comment, a swift no is valuable. Saves a lot of time and energy.
Well,
when you're the boss.
that's interesting that we could spend a lot of time unpacking that one, John. But guys, out of respect for your time, I'm going to close our call out today. Next week, I'm interviewing Craig Alexander, who I've already had some discussion with. We've got a fantastic discussion lined up that I think you'll find so enlightening, particularly how you use a lot of principles from the elitist level of sport and can transfer them across to life, to business, to relationships. So it will make for a really great experience. I hope you've got time to come along and hear what he's going to be sharing with us next week. Otherwise, have a great week. Thanks for being on the call today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Paul. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.